Governor Abbott, great to see you. By the way, thanks for inviting us inside the Texas Governor.
Pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, immigration, we're going to talk all about it. Look, it's you and the state of Texas, in essence, versus the Biden administration. How does this end, and what does it look like?
Well, it ends with a new president. The fact of the matter is, in the history of the United States of America, there's been no president who has abandoned the border, abandoned national security, as much as Joe Biden. You know, Americans need to remember this. Just 4 years ago, we had the most secure border in 45 years because President Trump put into place 4 policies: bring men in Mexico, Title 42, in catch and release, and build a border wall. And that decreased dramatically illegal immigration. When Joe Biden took office, he issued executive orders that ended all of those policies, but also opened the border to the entire world. And now we have people coming from more than 150 different countries across the globe, including people who are known terrorists, people who were let out of prison, people who are wanted for murder, people who came here and committed murder. And so this is an extraordinary, dangerous time caused by Joe Biden's open border policies.
Do you believe, you talked about the terrorists coming over in terms of from Middle Eastern countries, Chinese men or Chinese men of military age, if you will. This feels like treasonous activity. Do you believe the Biden administration is involved in this treasonous activity?
So Joe Biden has a requirement under the Constitution to secure our national security. He's utterly failed at that. Whether it be people who are on the terrorist watch list. Let me explain that here briefly. Sure. Because in Trump's last year, there were only 3 people who were apprehended coming across the border illegally who were on the terrorist watch list. Now we have hundreds upon hundreds who are apprehended. Here's my point. What no one knows is how many come across the border who are not apprehended. If you're on the terrorist watch list, you pay extra to not be caught. There could be thousands upon thousands. Now remember, just last month, the FBI director testified that there could be a terrorist threat because of our open southern border. You mentioned the people coming from China. Again, they've gone up in Joe Biden's first year. There was something like 340 people from China coming across the border. Last year, there were more than 24,000. In the first part of this fiscal year, there's already another 22,000. And so there's basically a Chinese military equivalent in the United States of America. And once again, no one knows what these people are up to.
Well, wouldn't that, some people would say that could be considered treason if you're letting folks like that into the country. But you don't want to go that far.
Well, what Americans have come to grips with, really, is this is a reason why Joe Biden should get fired. Let me point out exactly why I'm saying that. And that's because if you look at the #1 issue in every single state across the country, as well as the country at large, this is an issue where it's the #1 issue. It's the issue that Joe Biden is most upside down on. What I mean by that is his unfavorables far exceed his favorables. And so this will be an issue that will crush his reelection. I'll throw in another one completely unrelated to the border, and that is something that happened earlier this week. And that is inflation is going up again. The cost of living is going up, the cost of gas and groceries, things like that. And so you combine those 2 things together, and the crisis of safety, or say lack of safety, in our cities. And Joe Biden is going to be pushed out of office.
If Biden gets another term, are you concerned, I know this term of civil war, but in other words, skirmishes between the Texas law enforcement and the federal government, are you concerned about that at the border if Biden gets another term?
Let's say I'm resolute about what Texas is doing. Texas, we are building our own border wall. I say our own. It's the exact same wall that President Trump put up. So we didn't reinvent the wheel. We just invested in it. We're building these razor wire border barriers that deny illegal entry. And here are the most recent numbers. And that is illegal immigration has gone down in the state of Texas by 72%. At that very same time, it has increased in California, Arizona, and New Mexico by 24%. So it shows that what we're doing is working, and we will continue to expand what we're doing so that we can try to reduce to 0 the amount of illegal immigration taking place in Texas.
Use the word invasion. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. When you get there with that word and with that clause, that means you can engage in war. Have you thought about, is it off the table that you would go and get rid of these drug cartels, certain ones within Mexico, actually going into Mexico?
So I've already declared the drug cartels as terrorist organizations, and that authorizes law enforcement to take extra action against it. And you can have a war without actually invading a country. The war would not be against Mexico. But let's talk about it in terms of the way that James Madison talked about it, because he was one of the authors of it, but also he was one of the people who sold America, or the states, on ratifying the Constitution. When he was talking about it in Virginia, seeking ratification of the Constitution there were smugglers off the coast coming into Virginia, raiding Virginia. We're dealing with the very same thing, and that is we're dealing with smugglers and the cartels coming into the state of Texas. What Madison talked about is Virginia had the authority to defend itself under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. Texas has the right to defend ourselves, and we have our military deployed across the border, as James Madison anticipated. And our military on the border, we're building a military base as we speak down there. The only state to ever build a military base on our own border of our own National Guard that will house more than 2,000 National Guard members. And so we are using our military in ways never used before by states to defend against an invasion like what we are dealing with.
So SB 4, which obviously is in the court system now, the law, and help me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think so, but the law basically says that you can go ahead, Texas law enforcement can arrest an illegal immigrant, but in essence, you put him back to the port of entry, or in essence, turn him over to the feds. I mean, that becomes potentially catch and release again, because whatever the feds do with them, they do with them. I mean, I know judges have a role in all of this. So what about some sort of, people have suggested, some sort of green zone in Mexico? In other words, have Texas actually take the illegals and put them across the border rather than handing them back over to the feds?
Right. To be clear, it does not end up in catch and release, because what it does, if they come back to the state of Texas, they're subject to being arrested again and put behind bars for 20 years. And so there's every incentive in the world for them not to come back. Otherwise, we will arrest them and they'll spend decades behind bars. But let's be clear about what we're doing in SB 4, because what Texas is doing, we are authorizing every law enforcement officer in the state of Texas to do the federal government's job. Congress already passed laws that exist on the books today that require the federal government to deny illegal entry, to detain anybody who comes here illegally, and to deport people who come here who are captured. And all Texas is doing is actually enforcing the laws already on the books passed by Congress, just through the state process as opposed to the federal process.
You've been governor 9 years. This was a problem 9 years ago. Some folks will say, why didn't you do more back then? And of course, today, everybody's praising you in the conservative movement. But back then, 9 years, 8 years, 7 years ago, I'm not saying you weren't doing anything, but why wasn't more done at the beginning?
Yeah, to be clear, and to repeat myself, 4 years ago, we had the lowest number of illegal border crossings in more than 40 years. And then when Joe Biden came into office, that's when things began to escalate. And it was, Joe Biden took office in January, and then 2 months later, I began Operation Lone Star. So we began 2 months into the Biden administration in the aftermath of the lowest border crossings in 45 years.
Let me ask you a biblical question about law and order and compassion, both principal biblical tenets in the Bible. How does this immigration issue kind of balance those two? How do you see it? Some people will say, well, you need to have compassion. Others will say, well, wait, law and order, making sure there isn't chaos, is compassionate. How do you see it?
Well, chaos obviously is not compassionate.
Right.
It's not compassionate to have Lake and Riley killed. It's not compassionate to see New York police officers beat up by Venezuelan gang members. But also what is not compassionate is the federal government of the United States enticing women, children, and others to be sexually assaulted by the drug cartels, physically abused, sometimes murdered by them, or enticing them into a situation where they drown trying to cross the river. Know this, the United Nations, which is not a right-wing entity, the United Nations recently declared under Joe Biden's watch that the most deadly border in the entire world is the border between the United States of America and Mexico. That's on Joe Biden's watch. There's nothing compassionate about a deadly border. There is something compassionate, however, about order in society. And what Texas is trying to achieve is order in our society.
How far will you go? How far will Texas go? You say resolute, I think is the word you used earlier. How far will Texas go here? Because you can go pretty far.
Well, our goal is to make sure that we defend our border to the point where we are able to completely reduce illegal crossings into the state of Texas.
Mm-hmm. What is the ultimate goal of the Biden administration here? What are they trying to do? The open borders crowd, if you will. Is this about turning Texas blue? Is it about letting them vote? I talked to Speaker Johnson earlier in the last week or so, and he talked about this being about the census, in essence. And, in other words, getting voter representation for Democrats in cities where people are moving out of those cities.
Sure.
What's your view?
So part of it is because of the census, and people need to understand this in detail because it changes electoral politics in America. By changing the census, the way the census works is every 10 years is not based upon the number of citizens, it's based upon the number of residents, regardless of whether or not you are here legally or illegally. And if California is losing population to states like Texas and others of their citizens, they can still maintain the same number of members of Congress and the same number of electoral college votes that shape who becomes president if they allow in all these illegal residents. You have these large blue states like California, Illinois, and New York. They're losing population right and left. They're filling back in that population with people here illegally, and as a result, they will still have the same electoral college power that they otherwise would not have had if illegal residents were not counted. California, Illinois, and New York would probably have collectively 15 to 20 fewer electoral college votes. That would change the presidency. That said, I mean, there's other things here, and that is, this is Joe Biden just trying to appease and accommodate the far leftist in his party. There are a large number of Democrats who are really on the leftist progressive wing. They don't believe in borders. And this is Joe Biden acting to appease those while at the very same time saying things that are 180 degrees different of what he said when he was vice president and what he said when he was a United States senator. So why Joe Biden has changed so much is just bizarre.
And just a quick clarification, or not a clarification, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. Even though you've called for that this has been an invasion, you're saying Mexico is separate from that specifically, the country of Mexico. In other words, you have no desire to go into Mexico.
This is not, to be clear, this is not an invasion by Mexico. This is an invasion by the cartels who were the smugglers bringing people in. So once again, this is the equivalent of what James Madison was talking about when he talked about the smugglers off the shore of Virginia. We're dealing with our modern day smugglers off the border of Texas. And so this is not a state actor we're dealing with.
Governor Abbott.
These are non-state actors we're dealing with.
Thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.